I should have walked away, but I didn't. His touch lingered, his hands gentle and careful, as though I were something precious, something rare. I didn't feel the guilt I expected. Instead, for the first time in years, I felt seen. Not as a wife or a hostess, but as a woman, alive, breathing in the warmth of candlelight, longing for something real. When his lips met mine, slow and certain, my thoughts didn't stray to tomorrow, to the consequences, to the life I had known. In that moment, all I could think was, so this is what it feels like to truly be alive. I'm Monica, 41 years old, and for the past 15 years I've been the kind of woman who quietly holds everything together, without fanfare or recognition. I manage a small gallery in downtown Asheville, North Carolina, a place filled with local art, the scent of coffee that's always a bit too strong, and customers who greet me with a respectful, "Ma'am." Despite feeling 30 inside, my reflection in the mirror often tells a different story. Josh, my husband, is rarely home. He works in tech consulting, endless business trips, long Zoom calls, and layovers. It used to bother me. I'd wait by the window when his flights would land, eager to see him, eager to feel connected. Now, I simply mute my phone, letting his just-landed texts go straight to voicemail. Over the years, the distance between us has only grown. We don't have kids, though I once thought we would. Life, however, has its way of giving us what we didn't ask for and skipping over the parts we begged for. Our routine remains unchanged, though. I run the gallery, keep the house in order, and make small talk with Josh when he's home. We don't argue, we don't kiss with passion. Instead, we exist together in a quiet, soft silence. So when Josh told me he'd be flying to Chicago for nearly a month, I didn't bat an eye. I smiled, wished him luck, and packed his favorite cologne without him needing to ask. He left on a Sunday morning, as always, with a distracted kiss and a vague promise to check in. 2 days later, his father called. Henry, recovering from a knee procedure, was struggling with stairs, groceries, and basically everything else that required bending or lifting. Josh suggested I stay with him for a week or two, help him out. It made sense. Henry lived just 20 minutes from town, and with no other commitments, it seemed like the right thing to do. So I packed a small bag, left a note for the mailman, and drove up to Henry's house on a Wednesday morning. The air was thick with the smell of pine and earth, stirring memories I hadn't realized I'd buried. His house hadn't changed much. The same cedar siding, the same creaky porch swing, and the same wind chimes that hummed soft secrets. Secrets that seemed to echo through the years, whispering of a time long gone. Henry opened the door with a cane in one hand and a grin in the other. He wore a soft flannel shirt, smelled like mint tea and old paperbacks, and looked tired, but not unhappy to see me. Well, he said, didn't expect a Florence Nightingale, but I'll take the upgrade. I laughed. It was the first real laugh I'd had in days. That night we ate grilled trout and sweet potatoes while listening to an old jazz station that faded in and out like a memory. He told me about the surgery. I told him about a customer who tried to buy a $300 print with Canadian coins. We talked like two people who hadn't talked in years, but somehow never ran out of things to say. And when I went tobed alone in the guest room, smelling faintly of lavender and cedar, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Stillness, not emptiness, not sadness, just stillness. And somehow that scared me more than being alone. The next few days fell into a rhythm neither of us admitted we needed. I made breakfast, usually eggs, toast, and fruit if Henry remembered to pick it and he insisted on brewing coffee himself. No offense, Monica, but your coffee tastes like regret, he teased one morning, handing me a mug that actually smelled like something alive. We talked more than I ever talked with Josh. Not about anything groundbreaking, just stories, memories, little opinions about movies from the 70s or how avocados are overpriced for what they give you. But there was ease in it. Henry never interrupted, never reached for his phone, mid-sentence, never nodded, while clearly thinking about something else. He just listened, and in a way I hadn't realized, I missed. He looked at me when I spoke, not with desire, not with pity, just attention. By the third night, I found myself lingering longer at the dinner table, swirling, wine in my glass, watching him lean back in his chair and tell me about his late wife. She used to dance barefoot in this kitchen. He said, his voice warm with grief that had softened. With time, I always thought she was a little crazy. Turns out she was just free. There was silence after that. Not heavy, just full. And something in me shifted. It wasn't about Henry. It wasn't even about missing Josh. It was about missing myself. That girl who used to dance barefoot too. Before bills, before schedules, before being someone's wife became a job I wasn't sure I'd even applied for. That night, I went outside alone and sat. On the porch swing, the air was crisp, the wind a little louder in the trees. Pulled the blanket around my shoulders and closed my eyes. Somewhere inside, I felt a presence, not a ghost, not a thought. Just awareness. Henry's voice earlier that evening still echoed. She was just free, and for the first time in years I wondered if it still could be. It happened on the 5th night. The storm rolled in sometime, after midnight thunder, low and heavy. No turgent but insistent, like a slow drumbeat coming from beneath the earth. I was curled on the couch with a book. I wasn't reading, just listening to the sound of the rain, when Henry came downstairs in his robe. "Couldn't sleep," he said, voice husky. From dreams he hadn't finished, too quiet up there. I smiled. Funny, I thought it was too loud. He looked at me for a long moment. Then without asking, he sat beside me. Not on the other end of the couch, right next to knees, almost touching the room dimly. Lit by the fireplace, a single lamp, behind us casting more shadow than clarity. And yet nothing had ever felt clearer. I don't remember what we said next. Maybe nothing at all. I just remember the way he looked at me. Not like a father-in-law, not like a man twice my age, but like someone who had finally stopped, pretending not to notice. And I had noticed too, the way his voice lowered when he said my name, the way he never rushed past me in the hallway, the way his fingers brushed mine sometimes and didn't flinch away when his hand moved. It was slow. No assumptions. Just the back of his fingers against my cheek, a kind of reverence that made my throat tighten. I should go upstairs. I whispered, "You could," he replied, not moving, but would. "You want to?" I didn't. And that terrified me. But it didn't stop me. When he leaned in, his lips didn't crash into mine. They hovered, waiting. I closed the distance. It wasn't a kiss, filled with lust. It was filled with need, with years of being untouched, of being overlooked, of being second to meetings, emails, and other women's perfume. His kiss didn't demand anything. It offered, and I took it. If you've made it this far and your heart's pounding, even a little now's a perfect time to support stories like this. Click super chat or super stickers. Your small gestures help us keep telling the grown-up, bold, deeply human stories that no one else dares. To my hands found the collar of his robe, and his found the base of my neck. When he deepened the kiss, I didn't stop him. He leaned in, melted into it. His breath caught when my fingers slipped beneath, the robe tracing skin that had once held my husband as a child. It should have been wrong, but it felt like truth, because in that moment, I wasn't his daughter-in-law. I wasn't anybody's anything. I was just Monica Scene chosen, desired. We didn't rush. He kissed my shoulders like he was reading a story written there. His hands didn't grab, they studied, and when he finally whispered, "Tell me if I go too far," I didn't answer with words, I just guided him closer. I woke before the sun, Not because I'd set an alarm or heard a noise, but because something inside me had already started unraveling. The kind of awakening that doesn't come with panic, but with a strange gentleach. Like the body trying to return to itself after years of silence. Henry was still asleep beside me, his breath steady, his arm draped across my hip like it had always belonged there, his face softer than I'd ever seen it. Not guarded, not measured, just human. I watched him for a few minutes, memorizing that version of him, the one only I had now seen, the one who had touched me the night before, not out of impulse but intention. But with morning comes a different kind of light. I slipped out of bed and stood at the window, watching the fog rise over the vineyard like a secret stretching its limbs, my robe. His robe hung loose around me. Everything felt too quiet and yet too loud. The echo of last night still buzzed along my skin like an unanswered question I wasn't sure I was ready to face in the kitchen. The coffee tasted normal. The toast burned a little. I moved through the routine like muscle memory could still protect me. But nothing felt the same. When Henry entered, the silence shifted. Not heavy, just fuller. He didn't say good morning. He just stepped behind me and rested his hands on my shoulders. I thought, maybe it was a dream, he said. Quietly, I didn't turn. It wasn't another pause. Are you okay? I nodded before I even processed the question. I don't regret it, I said, but I don't know what to do with it. That was the truth. It hadn't felt wrong, it had felt necessary. But now, in the clear light of day, all I could feel was the weight of what came next. I wasn't expecting this, he said, any of it. Neither was I. And then, for a moment, we just stood there. The clock ticking, the birds beginning their morning songs, the world pretending like nothing had happened, like it hadn't shifted on its axis while the rain fell and a line was crossed. I don't expect anything, he said, finally, his voice lower. But I need you to know it wasn't just a night to me. I know, I said, turning to face him. But even as I said it, something in me clenched. Because that's the danger of being seen. Once suddenly, invisibility becomes unbearable. Later that day, I found his toothbrush still, resting in the holder beside mine. I stared at it for too long. Not because it was new, but because it had always been there. And I'd never noticed it before Mark returned on a Tuesday, secu days early. No warning, just the sound of his car tires crunching the gravel driveway as I stood barefoot in the kitchen, a lemon tart still cooling on the counter. He walked in with that practiced kind of exhaustion he wore like a tailored jacket tie, loose blazer slung over his shoulder, a bottle of Beau in one hand, and airport dust on his loafers. He smiled the way he always did after a trip, polite, predictably, a man returning to the life he assumed hadn't moved an inch in his absence. Smells like something citrusy, he said, placing the bottle down. Did you bake? I nodded quietly. Just something for the neighbors. He kissed my cheek, a brush, a duty, then excused himself to unpack. Henry was still upstairs. Not in my bed. He'd moved to the guest room the night before without discussion, without need for one. That's how you know something has changed you when even silence starts. Making decisions on your behalf. Dinner was normal. Mark talked about the Napa expansion, about how one investor's wife had complimented his cufflinks, about an overpriced steak that wasn't worth the hype. I smiled, nodded, played the role. But the entire time I was watching Henry across the table, his posture more guarded, his eyes distant, his fork barely touching the plate Mark didn't notice. Of course, he didn't. He never had. After dessert, Mark excused himself to shower. I began clearing plates, stacking them with a precision I didn't feel. And then, as I turned toward the sink, I felt at Henry's presence behind me. Close, steady, not intrusive, just grounding. I should go back to the guest house. He whispered. I didn't turn. That might be best. but my hands trembled slightly as I reached for the faucet. I need to leave before I undo everything. You've tried so hard to keep together. I finally turned. You didn't undo anything. Henry, you just opened a door. And now I'm still staring at Idar, but I haven't walked through. Not fully. He nodded the kind of nod that means goodbye without using the word. And just before he stepped out of the room, he paused and added, "For what it's worth, you still have time to choose you." Then he left. And that night, as Mark lay asleep beside me, his hand grazing my waist in a way that felt more muscle memory than desire, I stared at the ceiling and realized the betrayal wasn't the kiss, the touch, the body. It was how little I missed being. Here, how little of me had remained in this bed. At all. The next morning, I found Henry, already packed a single suitcase by the front door, his coat folded neatly over the handle. No drama, no final declarations, just the quiet weight of someone who had already made peace with leaving. He looked up when I entered the room. "I didn't want to wake you," he said, his voice even. "You didn't," I replied. I barely slept. There was a long silence. Not the uncomfortable kind, but the kind where you both know the words don't really matter anymore. Where everything that needed to be said had already been felt. I left the keys on the counter. He added, "And the new faucet works fine now. No more dripping." I laughed soft and unexpected. "You really are terrible at goodbyes," he smiled. "Only when I don't want to say own." He stepped closer, and for a moment, I thought he might kiss me again. Not with passion, but with finality. A quiet closing of a chapter. Neither Ophis had planned to open, but he didn't. Instead, he brushed a strand of hair from each cheek and said, "Take care of yourself, Vanessa. Not just the house, not just Mark, you." And then he left the door closed with the gentlest click I'd ever heard, and I stood there barefoot in a silk robe that suddenly felt too thin for the woman I had become. If you followed this far, and your heart's been quietly breaking with mine, consider supporting the channel with a super chat or a super sticker. It's a small way to say keep telling stories that aren't perfect but real stories, for grown-ups who've lived lost and still believe in starting over. That spring I didn't confess anything, not to Mark, not to the neighbors, not even to myself, not fully. But things changed subtly. Then all at once I started buying fresh flowers again. Not because we had guests, but because I liked how they looked on the kitchen island at sunrise. I stopped baking for the block and started journaling at night instead. I began saying no to events I didn't care about, to roles I no longer fit to, pretending. And when Mark asked why I seemed different, I simply smiled and said, "Maybe I finally remembered who I was before all this." Undi, he didn't ask more, and I didn't offer more, because some stories don't need to be told out loud. To matter, some revolutions happen quietly, in kitchens lit by candlelight, in the way a woman straightens her spine when noon's watching, in the memory of hands that didn't just touch but understood. I didn't leave the marriage that season, but I left the version of me that had forgotten how to want. And sometimes, that's the bigger step. Infidelity doesn't always begin in a bedroom. Sometimes it starts at the dinner table where silence grows louder than love. So before you judge anyone who strayed, ask yourself, when was the last time you looked at your partner and truly saw them before someone else did?